magnificent morning, awesome afternoon, and wonderful evenings for everyone around the world. I don't know where you are. I just started my afternoon. Jeanne is still morning time. And Shivali and Kamran are evening. Kamran's it's 9:30 p.m. Shivali is 10 p.m. And Jeanne is 9:30 a.m. So you can see there's a difference in time, but there's also differences in languages. And we don't always communicate very well with each other, whether it be me or Jeanne and Pastor Billy. We're all Native American speakers, but we still use language differently. And now we're adding two people, one from India and one from Pakistan, who communicate differently. And we're going to talk about communication, because actually communication is the world's biggest problem. We don't stop to make sure we understand what people are saying. For example, we have changed the name of the time of the show. I put it in the chat box the moment I was changing it. I put it in the message that goes out with the link to the show. And there have been people. Neville got the time wrong. He didn't read it. It's okay. It happens. So we don't have Neville today. Jeanne missed the show for the same reason on Tuesday. We need to make sure we are communicating. If we don't understand each other, 3 words are important. I don't understand. That is 6 syllables, but it could improve the world greatly by remembering to say those words. It could improve even the peace talks going around. I'm sure everyone feels the same thing, but no one's listening to each other. And I remember Rehan, when I first began this show, I first began doing my interviews. He told me to begin listening better. I do it better, but boy, I am not perfect in any sense of the word. Jeanne, you have been known to start it off before, and I'd like you to start it off now. Please.
Okay, I came prepared. I have some quotes.
So, you always come with quotes.
I know.
What is your quote?
I'll tell you my quote after I tell you these quotes. Okay?
Okay.
Is that a deal? So I want to start with Plato, because you have to go back to the beginning of time. Plato said, wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something. Which is an interesting thing to know. If you have something to say, wisdom. If you just want to hear yourself speak, not so smart. Brian Tracy, a personal development guru, wrote, communication is a skill you can learn. It's like riding a bicycle or typing. If you're willing to work at it, you can rapidly improve the quality of every part of your life. That's how integral communication is, Carla. It can improve every part of your life. And one of my favorite quotes is from Stephen Covey, from the seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. And we can go into that because I talk about this all the time. But my quote is, communication is an art and a science. The science is knowing all of the rules. The art is knowing how to put it together.
I want to add something to that, because communication is, as Neville said to me earlier, is the world's greatest problems. And it is very true that when people communicate, they're not listening. I don't always listen as well as I should.
I can explain that.
Can I finish what I'm
Yes, you
saying?
can.
Then you can talk. And the problem here is because we don't listen to learn, we listen to reply. There is very little real communication going on in the world. Okay, Jeanne, whatever you want to say.
It's a human function, part of the survival function, to move quickly. And so halfway through somebody talking, we automatically start thinking, what can I do? How can I save myself? So you're already going into what I call the Rolodex of the mind. And for anybody who's under 30, that's an old paper-based thing that we used to have that we could flip through, but you're flipping through all the cards in your head and you're saying, what can I say? How can I show that I'm superior? How can I show that I'm better? And so it goes back to survival, why we do that. It takes extra work and extra effort to stop yourself and say, listen to the end, listen to what they're saying. And when I'm doing my workshops, I work with people to actually summarize what's said before they respond. That way we know that you heard it. So it's a little awkward, but you'll hear somebody say, you know, what I understand you saying is that communication is really difficult. But what I want to tell you is, and then you go into what you want to say. That forces you to listen to the whole sentence before interrupting somebody. And it does take practice, and it's a skill that's great to build up. Cameron, your hand is up.
Is it?
Well, you kind of had it up there for a second.
No.
I wanted him to speak anyway, so come on, Cameron.
Right. I mean, I would go back to the title, Good Communication. Do you hear me? And I think that famous speech, friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ear, is really recognizing this problem, that people aren't necessarily paying attention. And I think it's very necessary, very critical that we gain attention and then hold the interest of the audience. And by how we do that is another subject. And then arouse a desire in them to learn, as Carla, you were talking about. And then, of course, no matter what you're saying, the wisdom part that Jeanne talked about from Plato, say it's, you have something to say, and which requires people to act on it. And, so in a sense, attention, interest, desire, and action is very critical for people to hear. And I think the communicator is at fault if people are not listening. So this is one perspective I would like to share. And I would also like us to go back to Aristotle. And again, I don't know, Jeanne, you always come back to, with ideas that go back 2,500 years ago. And Aristotle said something which is as relevant today as it was, and ethos, pathos, and logos. And I'd like to, in the next round of talk, to share my insights on that.
You can share it right now.
Oh, I don't want to take too much time. Jeanne, you know why I'm saying that, don't
Exactly.
you? I don't want to be that. Right now, I've just spoken about the AIDA, attention, interest, desire, and action. Very important that a good communicator does that.
Shivali, how does this sound to you?
Well, I'm taking on a very different perspective right now. Both these things, what you've said, are correct. But what is striking me about this word communication in present day world, I think we are barely communicating. There's a lot of noise in the world. Technology is creating a lot of, what should I say, a lot of advantages for us. But when I look at the social media, for example, and etc., other things, I find there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of confusion, and there's isolation taking place. Whereas communication is something which is intrinsic to us, not just to human beings, but to entire life around us, whether it's animal, birds. That's my take on it. And I feel that, as Carla had pointed out, that are we really communicating with each other? And it is disturbing. I find it disturbing. I used to say, once upon a time when Facebook had become very popular, that the reason why people are on Facebook is because they are lonely. They are essentially lonely. And they find it easier to communicate with strangers rather than with their friends and family. And this is something which really needs to be dealt with. So communication is needed. Yes, we had discussed this last time also, but are we really communicating? And how are we helping each other out? What are those biases that we are still holding on to, our perceptions? We want to hold on to that. And we don't want to let go of it out of fear of being rejected or being, made fun of or whatever. So I'm disturbed actually at this. This is what I feel, that we are living actually in a world where there's a lot of noise, a lot of chaos, and the voice is getting lost. The voice is getting lost, and we are not really communicating. We are making attempts. We are trying to put it on. But are we really communicating? Because if real communication was taking place, there wouldn't be wars, there wouldn't be discords, there wouldn't be disagreements. So what are we talking about? I really wonder.
Yeah. And I would like to add to Shivali's comment and observation, which is that we are witnessing extreme polarization across the globe. Extreme polarization, and it is resulting in conflict, which is highly dangerous. And why is that? Because we are over communicating, and we're over communicating in the way that we are not wanting to understand. We have taken positions and we want to judge and we want to prove the other wrong. That, to me, is the core of the issue. We are not understanding, we are judging. And that polarization has magnified it. I see it in Pakistan, I see it in India, I see it in the US, I see it even in this Ukraine experience. There's a hell of a lot of judgment being attached to remarks, no one questioning. So that's it, really.
Yeah, I just want to throw one thing in there, and then Pastor Billy, I want to hear from you because you were just in Ukraine, and I want to honor that. But what you guys have just described is the difference between talking and communicating. And this is something that I feel strongly about. Anybody can talk. The word talk has a lot of different definitions. However, communicating means one specific thing. It's an exchange of information. That means somebody else gets what you're saying and reflects it back with more information. So that it's a two-way street. And that, when you go back to, do you hear me? Good communications, do you hear me? The answer is probably not, because we're all talking, we're not listening. So there's no exchange of information. That's what I see when I'm doing my work. Pastor Billy, you were just over in Ukraine and you were doing a number of things, but one of the things that you said earlier was that you were helping get the message out.
Yes.
Which is good communication.
Exactly. I was actually on a 14-day listening tour, which is what I do through my nonprofit organization, widowsandorphans.info. And in the chat, for those that are viewing today and listening, they can see the work that I did there. But that was when I arrived in Lviv, which is Ukraine's largest city in the West, I went on a 5-day listening, emphasis on listening, exploration. I wanted to know for the Ukrainians, what are your greatest needs? And it was very interesting as I sat with medical directors from humanitarian organizations, from civilian soldiers, is that I understood through listening to them, what are your greatest needs? And they said, from a humanitarian perspective, they said to me, we don't need summer clothing. It's 30 degrees in Ukraine. And, this is really what all of what you've mentioned, Carla, Shivali, and Kamran, in order to meet the needs of people, whether it's on a one-on-one or whether, as I do, on a global, very large and broad perspective, okay, what are your needs? So as I met with Dr. Mariana at a health center in Lviv, she said, we received 300 boxes of COVID clothing. We don't need COVID clothing. We need food. We need combat trauma medical supplies. We need antibiotics. We need IV solutions. And myself, as a healthcare professional, that I am now shipping those. So it's very interesting. We're talking about communication because, and I've been involved in humanitarian work for the last 40 years, is that you have to go to the place where people can speak to you about what are their needs. And whether it's very practical, like food, or combat trauma medical supplies, I'm talking about quick clot dressings, pressure dressings, chest seals, tourniquets, or whether the majority of the Ukrainian people, they need pastoral help. They need someone to be there, as I did in Kyiv for a week, to hold their hand, to say that you are not forgotten, that you are not forsaken. And that is right there, live and in person. That's the beauty of good communication.
Thank you.
So the needs of the people. I mean,
yeah.
And so, and from communication, okay, what do you need? That's number one. And then number two, well, how can we deliver that need? And that's on a global perspective, or it's on an individual perspective. And as a result, okay, these are through listening. This is what I heard that you needed. Now, how do I get it from point A to point B? How do I get it from Warsaw to Lviv? And we were able to establish what we call a neutral corridor. In other words, we could get these supplies from Warsaw, Poland into Lviv, Ukraine, without having to go to a checkpoint and they'll tell us, well, you need to get all of this stuff out of your truck, and so we can examine it. But we established a neutral corridor, or what we call a green corridor. And look at that. Communication led to, I hear you, and now I can practically help you. And that's the beauty of communication. And as others have said, as Kamran has said, that's it. In Ukraine, there's a lot of confusion, but I was there in order to listen and then communicate and then to deliver. So it's LCD. Like we think of those LCD lights: listen, communicate, and then deliver. Bang, bang, bang. And that's what we did with about $10,000 worth of needed combat trauma medical supplies to save the lives of communication. So I'll conclude with saying, when you're in a war zone, think about this. when you're in a war zone, saving people's lives, where's the first thing you need to go? It's listening to people, okay? You listen to people, and then you communicate, and then you deliver. So there it is. Actually, that's step one for any crisis that you're in, is to listen to see what's the real crisis. And it's the same when we speak to each other. One of the things that I like to tell, I do this talk, and I start off with, do you talk or do you communicate? And do you know the difference? And that usually grabs the audience. They're kind of thinking, what is she talking about? But I have a magic question that I tell everybody to ask themselves before they even open their mouth. And I say, before you open your mouth, before you do a Facebook post, before you text, ask yourself this magic question. What do I really want to say? Because if you can think about what you really want to say before you say it, you can make sure it's clear. And if you think about it from the perspective of your audience, why do they care? Why do I need to say this to this person? Why do they care? Then it becomes relevant. And then when you ask yourself, what do you want them to do? Then it becomes actionable. So you ask, what do I need to say? Why is it important to them? What do I want them to do? And you do that in the span of a deep breath, and your communication becomes much more effective. Carla, you're drawing on the window?
No, I was thinking, and I did want to respond to that. In the English show, which I do, and I've been doing for almost 5 years, I have found that people come and they say, I want to speak English. And they say it beautifully. The words are there. But many of the people who come to speak are not willing to listen. And I've had people come from different parts of the world to speak English. And I go to ask them a very simple question, like, who are your parents? Where are you from? And they give me some long answer that doesn't answer the question. And I'm like, okay, what do you understand me? And the answer is no. And what I found yesterday, and it was extremely interesting, I had a young man come who had no English background. He's from Pakistan, and he didn't even know the basic words. I'm not putting down Pakistan at all. But what I'm putting down is we want to communicate, we want to say something, but we don't necessarily understand what we are saying. And that is a major problem for the world, that we do not stop to listen to understand. We just want to talk. And I had an English teacher come last week, and we became friends. I'm not sure exactly how that happened, because I was working with her on listening. She wasn't listening to a word I was saying. But at the same time, by the end, she understood what I was saying, or beginning to understand. And again, we had a chat in WhatsApp a little before the show. And she said, but you were bullying me. And I said, no, I was trying to get you to listen before you respond. And that was the issue. And that's the issue throughout the world that I'm seeing. Even you and I, Jeanne, we don't always understand each other. Pastor Billy, you speak English too. we don't always get it. And that's a big point.
I think one of the issues that we often ignore is that communicating is more than just the words. Sometimes it's the tone of voice. Sometimes it's how fast you speak. Sometimes it's how slow you speak. I mean, I have to tell you, when I'm in a hurry and somebody says, please slow down, and they do that kind of rhythm, it irritates me because I'm busy and I want to do something. But that person that does that for me is forcing me to slow down. But we have to remember how we stand, how we dress, how we put the tone in our voice. Sometimes, like, you might have been actually, I'm not saying that you did, Carla, but you might have been bullying to her because of the tone of voice or something.
Right.
And that's based on what her experience is. Or my experience with you is Carla's getting frustrated. She's not hearing. Carla's getting really frustrated. But you and I have spoken where I've said, Carla, take a beat, take a breath, because sometimes we get frustrated. All of us do. And then what we're trying to help somebody with is actually the issue we're having. But my son will tell me this all the time when I'm trying to correct him on something. Well, not anymore because he's an adult, but he'd go, Mom, you're doing what you're telling me not to do. And that's like egg on the face. But then I turned it around one time where I was like, now you know why I'm telling you not to do it. Now that you've experienced it.
Right.
So communications is a tapestry of a lot of different things. I mean, the words are only 7% of communication. The majority of communication comes from nonverbal communication. And that's one of the reasons social media is so noisy, Shivali, because it's only people putting out words. We have no clue what else is behind it. And it's people just want to be seen. They want to be seen. They want to be seen. And they often say, I want to be heard, but not really. They just want to be seen. And so when we can get it back to an exchange of information, then it's a whole different experience. Because I remember in the early days, you actually had debates on Facebook. Kamran, you put your hand up. Yeah, I was teaching for the last few weeks, so I'm used to that now.
Yeah. No, you were mentioning there's so much else other than words that is going on in a communication. And I found that if there is a trust deficit, that in itself can kill the very purpose of good communication. If the intents are doubted, if there is cynicism and there's mistrust, it leads to deadlocks that never end. I mean, if you look at Palestine, if you look at Ukraine, and now the Cold War, we thought had ended, but it has begun again. And there's so many disputes in the world, even Kashmir, for instance. I mean, educated people, God knows why they have this education in the first place. I mean, human lives are being lost and we just can't communicate. And we take communication as though it is talking and listening. And somehow, with all the academics, experts, certified professionals, there is an underlying mistrust in the whole process. And I find that there are agendas, there are interests, and deep-seated fears and insecurities that come in the way of good communication, effective communication. And of course, communication is not an objective process. It certainly isn't. I mean, I could say something very nice in my view, but it may not be received the same way by everyone listening. So let's address the trust deficit. How do we become open, candid, and share our intents and our stances and our interest in the entire negotiation? I mean, family feuds, boardroom battles, civil wars. Listening will be a major part to the healing process, provided we put the cards on the table. Do we really want a resolution, or do we want to keep a situation disturbed forever? And it suits a few people. I mean, Machiavelli always advised that, I'm afraid. Can you imagine what Machiavelli said? He said that if you want to sustain your rule, make sure your neighbors are enemies.
But what you're talking about is relationship. And the fact that we don't have relationships with everyone that we talk to is probably part of the problem, part of the puzzle that we need to address. You brought up family feuds, but a lot of times in families, there's some what I would call fractured relationships. And before they get to the family feud side, there's usually a lot of skirmishes, if you will, but there's a relationship. You know, there's whether it's fully trusted or not doesn't necessarily mean there's not a relationship. And what I find today, everybody, Shivali, you said it, people are lonely and they reach out. There's an old country song about finding love in all the wrong places, you know, and we don't have those civil structures that allow us to build those kinds of friendships, neighbors, extended family kind of things, because we're all moving around and we're like busy little atoms going zzz and not stopping for even a second. I mean, I just worked with a number of 3 and 4 year olds that are on the spectrum. And there was one little child that was specifically interesting to watch. He had no interest in connecting with anybody around him. So the teachers had to work to get him to do something. But when he felt like it and he put a smile on his face and he came over and hugged you, that really meant something, you know, because he deliberately went and did something there. And I find that we're like the regular kids, just running around. And then this special kid pops up and you're like, oh, wait a second. He has a relationship and with this one teacher, and we need to nurture that. So when we can get to a point where we can nurture the people we're talking to so that we're actually communicating, that might make a little bit of a difference.
Yeah. If I could jump in real quick with a quick comment.
Of course.
We're talking about listening as a avenue to communication, but I really want to talk about, in my comment here, is committed listening, radical listening. And there's a former president that I'm not a president of the United States that I'm not going to mention their name. But that and it's not the last one. It's a few presidents ago.
Oh,
but what they said about this individual was, and I'm quoting many people because I've been to the White House since 1983 in America. But they said about this president, this leader, this American leader, they said, when you spoke to this president, you felt like you were the only one in the room at that time. Think about that. That just everything, you know, and we're talking about crowded rooms. If you've ever been to the White House, it's a crowded room there in the East Wing, the West Wing, that, you know, whatever wing you're in the Oval Office, it's a crowded room. But this former president, I'll say his name, President Clinton. What everybody said about President Clinton during his 8 years in office and prior to that as governor is they said, when you talk with this man, you feel like you're the only one that is there in the room. And I experienced that. I met with him. It's been a number of years ago at a political rally. And somehow or other, if I can use my hands, he just zoomed on you with what you were saying, and you felt like, well, here's a big shot person. And I kind of feel like, he wasn't looking around. His gaze was not averted to other people. And so as a pastor, when I meet with people, I always, my body posture, my gaze, my everything, that individual is the only person I'm thinking about. And I learned that from President Clinton. Thank you very much.
And that's important. And I don't think that enough of us do that. And it's something that we need to develop. I need to develop it. I mean, here I was sharing the show out and listening intently, but I wasn't giving the show the attention for a little while that it needed, because I wanted to get it out to the world. Now, it's very difficult. And somehow I need to improve this. So I don't need to be the one doing it. Someone else can be doing it. But what that brings up, Pastor Billy, is, are we really listening to people? Are we really hearing the words they are saying? And I don't think so. Mm-hmm. I think I already mentioned a woman coming to the show last week who had difficulty hearing me. And she's an English teacher. But it wasn't because she was an English teacher that I was concerned. I was concerned because, one, there was a big language barrier to begin with. And not only a big language barrier, there was a barrier that was keeping us from hearing what we were saying to each other. And after 45 minutes, and I used another Vietnamese woman who was there with me, we began to communicate. Now, are people spending the time to make sure their communication is real? Or are they just spitting out words and thinking, oh, I understand what that person's saying. I don't need to listen completely. And that's the issue that I wanted to bring out.
I think the magic, sorry. I think there
Don't say you're
there is
sorry.
magic in listening to the unsaid. And there is always an underlying theme. Very few cultures are very low context and direct. Very few cultures are like that. Most cultures tend to be very high context. And what is being said is not necessarily what is meant. And you are expected to read between the lines, the unsaid, which obviously makes the challenge that much greater. And when we are talking of listening, the very foundation of good listening is patience. And the society we're in, the world in which we live, it is encouraging now, pay, buy now, pay later. The consumer society and everything that you see in the commercials is driving you into an instant society, instant gratification. And as a result, we are being conditioned to a point where we just don't have the time. I mean, 5 minutes is, if you ask anyone, and I do this exercise, for 5 minutes without interrupting, just listen to the other person. And he'll share or she will share his or her story. Just listen to it and do not interrupt, and just keep your hands behind your back with the intent to repeat back. And it's a struggle. It's just 5 minutes is like, and it's a day. God, I'm going to be quiet listening for 5 minutes. That's how it is. So patience has to be, and anything that you want to develop has to be exercised. So if anyone tests my patience, I thank them. Because if my patience is being tested, it means my patience muscles are expanding.
That's the best. Thank you.
And patient muscles are extremely important. We don't realize how important they are. And it's time that we begin taking that very seriously. I mean, I sometimes lose my patience.
Really?
No, not you, Carla. Come
Never.
on. Come on.
Yes.
Never.
Because Carla wants everything perfect, you know. And
Well,
so she
and
becomes
that's
very, yes. So she becomes very hard on herself, actually. She has
and
compassion for her. I mean, she has compassion for others, but she is not so compassionate towards herself. This is what I feel. She wants everything properly done, you know.
and
And
Shivali, that is a great point, and it's one of the points that fits into this whole thing about communication. So I'm not going to focus only on Carla because we all have this issue. The disease of perfectionism. Everything needs to be perfect before you do it, which, to be honest with you, nothing would ever get done. If we wait for perfection, it would never happen. So, you know, I prefer progress over perfection, but that's a muscle memory thing that we have to get better at, because we don't want to be embarrassed. I mean, I have a son. I've talked about him before. He was hyperactive, and when he was little, he would embarrass me because he's hyperactive, and he would just do whatever. Impulse move. I used to say, you act before you think. And he would say, what? You know, because he would just do it. And I, as the mother, would be embarrassed. And then one day during a PTA performance that the kids were putting on, I'm sitting about midway in the audience. The kids are behind us, and I hear somebody burping the alphabet. And all I could do was sit back like this and go, yeah, that's my son, you know. That's when I realized I have no control over those kinds of things. And I started working on my issue of needing to be that perfect, you know, that perfect mom. There's no way. There was just no way, because my son had a mind of his own, and he was going to show the world, you know. And so in my working life, I try to catch myself when perfectionism is getting in the way, but I'm not always good at it. But Carla and I have talked about this before. You know, we all want to be perfect, but it ain't happening, because we are flawed individuals, and it's our flaws that make us beautiful.
Oh, I want to disagree with you a little. We are individuals. Luckily, we are individuals. And I can only be the perfect Carla with my faults. You can be only the perfect Jeanne. Pastor Billy can only be the perfect Pastor Billy. And same with Shivali and Kamran. And because of that, and that's what I was talking to this lady about earlier today, because of that, why are you worried about what anyone else says or does? Because you are the most perfect person you are as you are. You can't be anyone else. So as we begin to realize that, we begin to grow and expand our own vortex or our own being. Now, along with that, because of that, we have our own little mind and our own little world, no matter how big it is. And in that world that we have, guess what? We all think slightly differently. Words take different meaning. When I was learning to teach reading, it was brought out that house can be a different word meaning for different people in different types of residencies. So when we are using any word, it may mean something to us and something different to someone else. And unless we say, oh, house, you're talking about green around the house? My house is on the 3rd floor and there's nothing outside. There's no balcony. What are you talking about? But people stop before they think about that. They stop talking about, they don't say, what are you talking about? They just talk. And that's where the confusion comes in. I hope that was clear.
Yeah.
I come from the land of electronics and technologies where jargon is king. So they have all these words that mean things that to the outside world, to the regular world, mean absolutely nothing. Like MIPS, millions of instructions per second. I don't know. Why do I need to worry about that? But somebody's talking to me about a new MIPS technology. This was years ago, and I was just looking at them going, wow, I don't know what you mean. And they looked at me like I was silly, and I go, I have to write to an 8th grade level, for people that don't have double-E engineering degrees. So can you explain that? And it took a while for them to break it down. But jargon, we all tend to speak in jargon, which is kind of a shorthand. So people that are in your same field will understand what you're saying, and it becomes a secret language. I swear to God, the user manuals for anything that's tool related, that comes out of Home Depot or any hardware store, has a certain language that I, as a female, was not brought up on, because I read these user manuals and I go, wait a second, there are 3 steps missing, but it becomes kind of a joke because they're written to help somebody like me, but they're not written for somebody like me. And that goes in a lot of communications. It's the same with a lot of communications. There's a shorthand, and if you're not privy to the shorthand, then you're lost. But we have to get comfortable to say, hey, I didn't understand that, which is what you said in the beginning, Carla. I have to get comfortable to say, I'm not sure what you mean here. And that's okay. That's actually a sign of strength.
Yes, I completely agree. In fact, I had said this in the last show. This is technical jargon, people use it, and they sometimes speak, because they are comfortable with that language. For these examples, like software engineers, etc. They have a typical way of speaking, especially in the corporates. I have experienced this. So I have always said, could you please tell me the full form of the term that you have just used? I was never embarrassed, and I never feel embarrassed. Because you see, what is the purpose of communication? What is the intention behind it? You want to connect, right? You want the other person to understand your thoughts. At the same time, you would like to understand the other person. So if that is not happening, what is the purpose? Then it's mere talking. Then it's not communication. So yes, I agree with this completely. And second thing that you had mentioned earlier, that communication is involving non-verbal, verbal, both aspects. Non-verbal is even more important, where the way you speak, the speed, volume, pitch, whatever you were mentioning, all this becomes important. And what he also pointed out a little earlier, that meeting with the president, that the person feels as if he's the only one in the room. That's because there's focused attention on that person, and that person is actually listening. The president was listening to him, actually, not just hearing him or just talking to him, but the intention was there to connect with him. Once the intention is there that I want to communicate, I want to connect, the communication will take place. Doesn't matter whether there is a crowd around or noise in the room. So all these aspects are very well covered. Thank you so much. Yes, all this is so important. But my question remains, there's so much of chaos in the world. There's a lot of suffering in the world. So how do we change it? and it's going to happen only through talks, through communication, effective communication. Are we willing to understand each other? Are we willing to keep the dialogue open? Or we are just there to put our point of view and say, okay, I say this. Then it becomes like a debate. It's not a discussion. It's not really looking for solutions. And that is the biggest challenge in today's world. In spite of having technology at our fingertips, now we have 5G, tomorrow we'll have 6G, 7G, probably because we want to be seen faster. We want to be heard faster. The information, whatever the government agencies or whoever wants to put to us, will come to us and at a faster pace. But we also know that the commercialization is taking place in every aspect. We are being fed. This is being fed to us. We are not being given time to think. If we are given time to think for ourselves, I think we can communicate better. Here it is used. If we have, this Alexa, for example of technology, it's making us lazy. It's going to do everything for us.
Yes. I will never have Alexa or Siri in my home or nonprofit organization. So thank you for that, Shivali. Thank you for that. Sorry,
No,
I don't
absolutely.
Absolutely. I don't want a relationship with Alexa. I just want a relationship with God, with Jesus Messiah.
Absolutely. And that is so important. Consciousness, which I keep on harping each time I come to meet all of you lovely people here. It's a consciousness. We are becoming more and more involved in this externals. The consciousness has to connect with the divine. You call him God, you want to call him the divinity, the divine presence, the cosmic connect, Allah, God, whatever you want to call him. Till your consciousness is divinely connected, I think communication will not take place. All these problems that we are facing today, we faced it 20 years ago, we faced them 50 years ago, we have been facing them. But the key to this is, I think our consciousness needs to change. Once our consciousness changes, and the only way we can do it, which I keep on harping, I would say, spiritual nourishment. Unless we spiritually nourish ourselves, communication will be remaining just at a superficial level. We don't really want solutions. We just want to sit across the table and talk, right? What's our intention? Yes.
What you're talking about is what we can do individually, which is really important. We can change the world by changing ourselves and changing our intentions, because we influence 3 people and they influence 3 people and so on and so on and so on. But then when we get up to the collectives, that takes a little bit more of a macro perspective, and that's policy changes and things like that. But I'm not sure we're ready for all of that just yet. I think we still have to work on the individual level. So I'd like to get us back to taking time to listen, taking time to stop. There was a point when my son was a teenager and going through what teenagers go through, where I put him in the car and we drove. And he said, "Where are we going?" I said, "Nowhere." But I knew that he would talk to me if we were in the car listening to, I think it was Lynyrd Skynyrd was the band that we could both listen to and not kill each other. And so I put the music on and we're driving down the highway, and I knew if I just drove, he would start talking. And that became our communication portal, if you will. So it's finding those things that you can do. I told you I was working with the youngsters last week that were autistic, and just sitting next to one of the little boys when he was upset, all I did was just sit. There was nothing I could do but just be there with him. And it was amazing what the difference that made for that little tyke. I mean, he actually grabbed my hand to go play when he was calmed down. And that taught me a lesson about taking a moment. He was actually teaching me to slow down And just because he wasn't going to be the same as everybody else, but honoring that he was different made him calm down, and well, didn't make him, he calmed down. And letting him communicate in his own way made a difference. If we could be that cognizant of how to communicate with each other in our own personal lives, we would make a difference that could spread widely. Yeah. So I actually started to think these little tykes aren't necessarily that different. They're just smarter than us.
Exactly.
And also, one thing that I like about my English show is that we do it on Zoom. I have found that I do more conversations now where I can see the person's face, because being able to look at the face helps me understand. I do very little conversations with anyone these days, no matter who they are, unless it's video. And that's to help improve communication. And I have been asked many times, can we talk on Zoom? And usually I'll say, yeah, let's do it. It's better. There's more communication. So we are very lucky that we can be in different, none of us are in proximity that we can go visit. But I feel like I know everyone here because I have spoken to them on Zoom, and it's like we're in the same living room. Kamran, you look like you want to say something.
Yes, I thought that since we are approaching 10:32, concluding remarks are in order.
So do you want to give some concluding remarks?
Yes, I would like to. And one thing that I would like us all to consider is barriers to good communication. In that, there could be a long list, but the ones that come to my mind are ego, arrogance, and also lack of humility, which is quite the opposite. Humility is so key in listening as well. So arrogance is one I would like to highlight. Of course, there are many other barriers, and I would want to hear from our panelists what they see as barriers. And I'd like to also, if you remember at the start, I mentioned ethos, pathos, logos, thanks to Aristotle. And, Reverend Billy, when he spoke of his experience in Ukraine, I thought that was a great example of ethos, pathos, and logos. For example, through his aggressive listening, he was able to get his audience to trust him. He was also getting his audience to feel that they're understood, and that is pathos. And he was also getting them to think, because they need to, when they are speaking, they need to think in terms of what they're experiencing and put across their concerns. So in a way, just through listening, you are able to accomplish to a large extent the three cardinal principles of communication: ethos, pathos, and logos. So I would like us to identify barriers and overcome them in order that we can connect, as Shivali rightly mentioned, and have meaningful exchanges so that we come out with some agreements that we can stick to and benefit all concerned. Thank you.
You're welcome. Shivali?
I think he's brilliantly summed it up. Yes, the barriers which are there. The barriers are within us. As was pointed out, that we need to work on ourselves individually first. And then automatically what happens, we can see the transformation, the externals also. So it begins with myself, right? It begins with myself. I need to work upon myself. I'm not perfect, and neither does the world expect me to be perfect. So if there is some sort of a barrier, And if I could for a moment understand what is it, to reflect upon myself through my silence or whatever, as the example of children was being given, that, they also require patient listening, actually, where we just listen to them and they reveal and things start flowing. So likewise, I think when we are speaking of barriers, I think emotional barriers can also be there. It could be due to the fact that, someone's personal life experience has not been a very happy one. He's grown up in a family or in an environment which was not really conducive, where the person did not, was not encouraged to speak up, was always corrected. So this becomes these childhood things which take place with us. They become one of the major reasons for barriers as we are growing up. So I think this is also something we need to look into. And I think patience is the key. Patience with ourselves and the others, and accepting others. Then only we can communicate.
Right. Yeah. Well, my concluding remarks, I'm going to quote the Beatles, that famous American group, right? The Beatles. Everybody knows John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And they actually said a very deep theological statement in one of their songs, which is entitled, "All You Need Is Love." All you need is love. Do you hear that song now flowing through your head? All you need is love, love. All you need is love. And anyway, minus all the other confabulations that the Beatles were involved with, that's what I say as I go to the 18 war zones around the world. And again, my prejudice, my filter is the love of Jesus Messiah, which allows me to deeply and radically listen to people and hear their needs, and then listen, communicate, deliver. LCD. Notice I didn't say LSD. I said LCD. Okay. So I just do it with the love of Jesus Messiah, LCD. Listen, communicate, then deliver, not LSD. And so that's all I have to say. I better go before Carla kicks me off. All right.
No, actually, LSD could be listening, speaking, deliver.
Okay. I'll take that instead of the other stuff. All right, there you go.
Okay. Don't go anywhere, Pastor Billy. Jeanne?
Well, I think everybody said something great for summing it up, but I think one of the things that we have to give ourselves and the people we're talking to is the gift of time, so that we're not rushing through, and we can listen radically, and we can understand each other by taking time and then summarizing back. But I will remind you of my 3 questions that I try to get across to people. Ask yourself, what is it I want to say? Ask why it's important to your audience, to the person you're talking to, and ask what you want them to do so that you can be more effective in getting your point across.
And since I work in this communication field constantly too, I agree. We need to be able to ask questions. The more we ask, the more we say, I do not know, the more we're going to learn. And I had just one quick experience that came to mind as you guys were talking. Is I was talking to a person, and this was not an English speaking person. And I would say, I don't understand, please speak slower. And I thought those words were so easy to understand. But I found out later that that person didn't understand what I was saying, and that person didn't tell me. So I had no, and I would say, please speak slower. I do not understand. Didn't get it. Just repeat it for me. Oh, she always says she doesn't understand, which was true. But he had no idea that I didn't know what he didn't understand about what I was saying. And this happens all the time. I want to thank Kamran, Shivali, Pastor Billy, and Jeanne for a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you for coming today and being a part of MindPlore. And for those people watching out in the world somewhere, thank you for joining us. And I hope you enjoyed this live or on replay. And Jeanne, I think I've covered everything.
Just one last thing, and that's if you see us on Facebook on MindPlore with Carla and Friends, or in Giggle Fest University on YouTube, please subscribe, like, and share. That helps get the word out to your friends and their friends, and so on and so on.
Wonderful. And with that, can we all wave goodbye? Bye, everyone.
Nice to meet you, Shivali.